Hey Life Groups, welcome back. We're jumping into a brand new series this week where we're discussing and covering the life of Samson. Now, if you grew up in church, you might be familiar with some of the stories and highlights of Samson and just how strong he was, but in this series specifically, we're going to focus on just how weak he was and what we can learn from his story. Now in Judges chapter 13, an angel of the Lord appears to a woman and says, hey, I know that you're unable to have children, but you're going to have a son, and he's going to be a Nazarite, and he will be the one that takes the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So just as we see several other times throughout Scripture, we have a woman who's unable to have children, but whom God decides to do a miracle through. Now the angel said that the child was going to be a Nazarite, which meant there were special rules in place. Things like no wine or fermented drinks, no grapes, don't even come close to them, don't cut your hair, follow the Old Testament Levitical law, don't touch anything that was deemed to be unclean or even dead animals. And so it's foreshadowing what we're about to see in Judges 14. But Samson is born and he grew up and the Lord blessed him. And we fast forward to Judges 14 and the time comes for Samson to be married. And he sees a Philistine woman in a place called Timnah and insists on marrying her despite her parents' objections. They didn't realize that this was all part of God's plan to challenge the Philistines. And on his way to Timnah to meet this woman, Samson kills a lion with his bare hands, and later he finds bees and honey inside this lion's carcass, and he eats some, breaking the Nazarite vow, and even sharing some with his parents, but not telling them where it came from. Later on, Samson holds a feast, which is a week-long customary celebration for his wedding, and during the wedding feast, Samson poses a riddle and a wager to the Philistine guests based on eating the honey out of the lion carcass, and he gives them 7 days to come up with the answer. And the riddle was, out of the eater, something to eat, and out of the strong, something sweet. So they go throughout this process of trying to figure out what this riddle was, and finally, coming to the realization that they had no idea what the answer was, the Philistines pressured and even threatened Samson's wife into finding the answer. And she throws this whole fit and gets really dramatic and cries the whole 7 days until Samson's finally fed up with it and finally tells her what the answer was. And then she, in turn, tells her people so they don't lose the bet. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this story, right? There's a lot to kind of dive through and to read through, but the big takeaway is that Samson was impulsive and self-gratifying, right? He wanted the girl, he wanted the food, and it didn't matter if it fit into his morality or not. It didn't matter whether it conflicted with the Nazarite law or vow that he took. It didn't matter whether it pleased God or not. He was just willing to compromise all of that for immediate gratification. And one thing that we see that Samson didn't do is he didn't seek wisdom or God. And what we have to wrestle with is are we all that different? Right? I think if I'm honest with myself, I'm impulsive and I've done things that would be considered self-gratifying. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you could say the same thing. So what can we learn from Samson's story? We're going to continue to unpack this story over the next couple of weeks, but in the meantime, enjoy your discussion today with your group.